Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out. This is the World Campus Technology Club, and tonight we have a presentation with Josh Maleeff about creating engaging virtual presentations. Thank you for coming, Josh.
Sure. Thanks for having me tonight. So welcome, everybody. So yeah, as Ray said, we're going to be talking about presenting virtually, which in 2020 has gone from a novelty to a necessity. So the title of the presentation, as you see on the screen there, is A Map to Presenting Engaging Virtual Presentations. I am your host for this evening, Josh Maleeff. So a little bit of an intro and why you're listening to me talk to you about all this fun stuff. So a couple of fun facts here. So I graduated from Penn State. I am an alum, class of 97. Before getting into what I do now, I spent 15 years in sales. After that, I realized I wanted to transition to something different. And so I became a corporate trainer, which I've been doing for about the last 8 of those years. And like most trainers, I spent my days in classrooms training people. However, over the last several years, virtual training has picked up a little bit of steam. And a few years ago, I took a certificate a program to learn more about virtual training, which turned out to serve me well in 2020 here, and learned a lot in that has worked well, and that is the basis of what I'm going to be talking to you about in this presentation. And so on top of that, other piece is I am the founder and co-president of the Learning and Development Professionals of Greater Philadelphia. So a lot of my viewpoint on what I'm talking about tonight is from the idea of delivering virtual classes. However, it applies in a lot of different formats as well. So as part of classwork, you're going to have opportunities to present to your class, to your professors, classmates, etc. And so that's one area. As you progress through your time here and just in life in general, you may find yourself on an interview. I actually changed jobs back in May and was interviewing in April at the early days of the pandemic, and took a lot of the skills that I use towards virtual training to work towards an interview too. So a lot of this stuff has applications in multiple spots. And the other piece of what I'm going to do here as we jump in is I'm going to be talking about a lot of different things, but throughout the presentation, I'm also modeling a lot of those things. So the first piece of that I want to get into is I've got a poll to kick this thing off. And we'll come back to this a little bit later in the presentation as well, but this is a service called Poll Everywhere. And what I'd like to ask the people who are doing this presentation live tonight is to join me in doing the poll. If you're watching this on recording, it'll be a little bit hard to go in, but you'll get to see the results. So the way that this works is that there is a website at the very top of the screen there. So what you need to do is go into a browser and pull up pollev.com/ and it's my name and some numbers. So Josh Maleeff 667.
Kitchen up first.
Oop, I hear somebody
An hour.
popping in the background there.
I'm doing this.
So I'll take care of that. So other fun part of presenting, sometimes people come off mute, and knowing how to mute them is also a helpful tool. So back to this though, at the top of the screen there, and again, you can open this in a browser, you can go on your phone and do it in a browser as well, but you want to pull up that website up top there. So pollev.com/ Josh Maleeff 667. Once you do that, what you will see is these lovely faces on the screen there, and I'm asking you a question here is, how do you feel about giving presentations on a virtual platform? So basically click on the emoji there that best matches your feelings around that. And what you'll start to see is there's a couple of flags planting. So far everybody's on the same smiley face there. It's a little green on green as it comes up on the screen, but I'm starting to see that gives me a good idea of how you guys feel about it. And actually, so we've got people from largely here, it looks like very confident, which is good. That helps me on this. I think as we go through the presentation here, what you'll see though is I'm going to give you some suggestions to fine tune. So even if you're doing well with this already and feeling confident, you may pick up a couple of nuanced things. And for those of you who aren't necessarily as confident or aren't watching this live and weren't able to answer, there's even more potentially there. So with that, I'm going to do another poll everywhere. So if you keep the same browser window open, as I change my slide here, you should see a different question load. And what I'm asking now is, what challenges have you encountered during virtual presentations as either a presenter or an attendee? So go ahead and you can put short phrase into that. What'll happen is as you post your answers, it'll also give you an opportunity to, if you see another answer that somebody else put that you like, you have the opportunity to upvote it as well. So challenges, engaging with the audience. Yeah, that's a tricky one, right? Yeah, you have to find ways to engage, which is something I'm going to be modeling throughout this, including what we're doing right now. This is an engagement tool. Lack of audience response when speaking, so it goes along the same lines. Understanding when's the best time to speak without interrupting. Yeah, there's a couple issues with that. You know, as a trainer, when I'm leading a class, right, I'll direct questions at people, and even then, there's people looking at or virtually looking at each other and saying, "Do I go off mute now and talk?" And then there's the other technical challenges of the lag that comes into play, right? Because there's a little bit of a delay, so there's times where you think you've got a clear space to talk, and it turns out it's not. So that's always a challenge as well. Technical problems. Yeah, we're going to be talking about that towards the end of the presentation tonight too. Answering questions on the fly. That's an interesting one. I would say that's although I'm not going to talk about that directly in this, it's an important skill. And the reason it doesn't come up specifically in this is because I'd say that's something that goes along with presenting in general, as opposed to specifically to presenting in the virtual space. Being able to answer those questions on the fly has a lot to do with how well you're able to, how well you know your subject matter and how well you can improvise those answers and be flexible with it as well. But by way of the engagement piece, by getting you guys to participate and do some responses here, it gives us some stuff to talk about. And even though I'm not talking to each of you individually, I'm able to respond to the comments that you've put into the poll there. So thank you guys for that. I'm going to move on from the poll for right now, though. And what I want to talk about next is building your toolbox. And I want to explain what I mean by that. When I took that certification I mentioned, and also just as I've done more virtual training, what has really become apparent is that the preparation and the setup is the most important part of having a successful virtual presentation. Now, you need to actually be able to show up and give the presentation as well. But the preparation ahead of time is really going to be a huge factor in the success of it. So I'll tell a little bit of a story here. As I mentioned, most of my time presenting and teaching has been in a face-to-face situation. And like all of us experienced, the pandemic came on quickly and forced a lot of rapid changes. In my case specifically, I was actually in the middle of teaching a new hire class when on a Friday, my company decided to send everybody home. And so I went from teaching a class in person on a Friday to then being virtual the following Monday. And there's all kinds of challenges there that include things like adapting your material, right? There's certain activities that you can't do in person or you can do in person that you can't do virtually. But a big part of it was figuring out what my home studio was going to look like. So I'll ask you to think about this for a minute. If you remember back to the early days of the pandemic, if you were watching TV at all, news shows, late night shows, all of a sudden people went from broadcasting in studios to, in some cases, their attics or basements and all kinds of stuff like that. And for the first week or two, it looked like that. They set up, they had poor lighting, maybe they were using their phones as cameras. And then over time, they got the right equipment set up and it started to look better to us as viewers. The same thing is true of presenting in the virtual space. And so in order to make that jump from looking like you're in the dark somewhere and, we can barely see you and it's not a great visual to where we can get to today requires having the right tools. So I'm going to break those down for you. First piece here is the first tool in your toolbox is going to be the webcam. So a question for all of you, and one thing I'm going to do back to, again, since engagement came up in those things, what I'm going to ask from you guys is to use the chat box a little bit here for me. And the first question I have on here is, do you use the webcam that's built into your computer? And what I'm asking that is as opposed to something, another camera, but go ahead and share your answers with me. I'm curious on this. So it can just be a quick yes or no, but let me know what you're doing for that piece. And while you're doing that, you also mentioned technical problems, and sometimes there's little weird glitches. There we go. My chat box had momentarily disappeared on me, which was fun. So I'm seeing Ray said no, she's using a USB camera. A lot of yeses. I have a PC, not a webcam built in. Okay, so a little bit of mix. So for those of you guys who said you're using your the built-in camera, what works well with using the camera that was built into your computer? Give me some thoughts back in the chat again there too. Less tech issues. Yeah, it's ready to go, right? It's there, so the computer generally recognizes it. So the next question though is, what problems does it cause using the webcam that's built into your computer? Weird angles. Yeah, that's like the number one. Yeah, right, because all of a sudden you're at the mercy of where your laptop is. So when I first was doing those classes from home, I realized I set it up on my desk because I needed to use my computer, but the angles were weird. And it was also showing up too much of my ceiling, for example. Camera up your nose. Yeah, exactly. And you don't look at it if you're using external displays. Low quality can be true as well. Thank you guys for answering that in the chat. So what do we do then in that case? How do you resolve that? So I saw at least one of you is using a USB camera or an external webcam, which is what our main option is to look at a camera. So the one that's on screen at the moment is the one that I'm currently using. And this is also something that as we've gone through the last couple of months, as everybody was scrambling to get the right equipment, it was hard to find a decent webcam. There was, and I had my eye on one specific model that I wanted to get, and it just never became available. Fortunately, I had a friend who is an IT administrator and had been using some webcams at his company. Said, "I've got a recommendation for you." And so the one that I'm using is the one on the screen, and I just put the link into the chat for where you can find that on Amazon. The nice thing about this camera is that it is a high-def camera. It sits on top of my monitor, and it's relatively inexpensive. It's on sale as we speak right now for less than $40. I think it's down to like 35. And so you can get a high-def camera. And the nice thing is, you see with what I'm doing with the camera right now, because I've arranged it to be basically at eye level, one of the tricks that I'll give you too is you want to make as much eye contact with the camera as possible, because that's going to be the closest equivalent to looking at somebody and making eye contact as if you were in person. And because I've got it at this level, I've got the right angle, as opposed to if it was sitting where my laptop was and now I've got the up the nose angle that was mentioned in the chat earlier. So it makes a big difference as to what you can see and do. And so that's why I recommend the camera piece for this. Any questions on cameras before I move on to the next item in the toolkit? And feel free to either unmute yourself or put something into the chat. All right. Oh, how do I read your notes while you're looking at the camera? Good question. So the way that works out is that is actually one that I'm going to talk about when we get to another item in the toolkit in a little bit. So to avoid spoilers, I'm going to hold off on that particular question, but keep them coming. All right. So let's look at the next thing here. So the next piece we've got is lighting. And when we talk about lighting, you know, my question is, and I've got a picture on the screen to go along with it, is have you ever attended a meeting with a silhouette? And so you see this guy here who is, you know, he's in a room there, there's light in the back, but you can't really make out the features of the person talking. And so that becomes an issue there, right? And so the solution to that is try turning on the lights. So I've now got the same guy in the same room, but there's a difference. You can see him. And the challenge with this comes in the fact that most of the places that you'll see the lighting in most of our homes, especially, which is where we're doing these presentations from now, we are in rooms that are either there's lighting in the ceiling or like in this picture here, there's a lamp, which is not giving you the front facing lighting that you really need, which gives you the option of uh, for a starting point here, you can get a halo light, which is actually, this is the exact one I'm using right now. Also, what has happened with these is there was a huge demand for them. The pricing on these has come way down as people have started to buy them and supplies have come back. The link for this one is now in chat as well. I saw this one recently for under $20. I think I paid closer to 50 for it at the start of all of this. So it's a nice device. It's what I'm using right now, just to show you what the difference is. I'm in a pretty well lit space, but that's the light off. So all of a sudden it gets a lot darker. So it makes a big difference on lighting you up. And when you want people to be watching you for a sustained period of time, like this tonight's about an hour, you want to be able to be seen. So that becomes an important piece of this. That's one option. I will tell you, in addition to that, it comes with a short tripod. I put it on a regular size tripod for like a camera because I wanted it at the right height. So that's an option too, and that's an additional accessory. But one thing that I'm focusing on too as you're going through this is that you can build a toolkit with the right tools relatively inexpensively. There are more expensive options on most of these things, but you don't have to use them. For example, you can get a key light. And the key light is more of a studio kind of light. This thing is going to run you closer to like $100, and it may be overkill. You may find yourself washed out even, but that is another option that's out there. Let me pause again. Any specific lighting questions from anybody? And I'll tell you what, I'll also have time for questions at the end of this, so don't feel like you have to ask them now, but let me, I'll move on to, let's go to the next item. The next toolbox item is the headset. So, question for you guys. Where is the microphone on your laptop? And somebody said they're using a desktop, so it can apply to that as well. I don't know is an acceptable answer for this question. But go ahead and put that in the chat and tell me where on your laptop you would find the microphone. Mic is on the webcam, so if you have an external webcam, that's an option. You've got a Yeti, that's a pretty good mic, but again, that's the external one. An external headset from somebody else. So you guys are the pros here, right? The camera that I showed you actually does have a mic in it. I don't use it. And for a similar reason, on the motherboard, all right, and for a similar reason, so I'm going to tell you. So the challenge with a mic that's just built into a laptop is it's not pointed at anywhere specific. It's meant to pick up sound in the immediate area. People don't know where it is. It's there. It's going to pick up sound. And so if you've ever been in that meeting with somebody who's like yelling into their computer, I found this picture and that made me think of that. Right. And so it sounds, if they're close enough to the microphone, you're getting blasted out, or it sounds like they're in a tunnel somewhere. So the solution to that is to look at a headset if you're doing this kind of presentation. Now, if you have something like a Yeti mic and you're doing higher end recording, that's going to be awesome as well. This specific headset that I'm using now and that's on the screen and that I'm also going to also put into the chat here is one that a previous job I was at was working with training call center agents, and this is what they use. So the nice thing about this is that the sound is good, which is the part that I'm least concerned about in this piece. I want to be able to hear people when they're talking to me if they ask questions, but I'm more concerned when giving a presentation that you all can hear me. And so what's nice about this is it's a sensitive mic, but it's also sensitive within a much smaller area. So I'm in a pretty quiet space by design, and I actually work out of my basement, which is where I am right now. And there aren't any windows or anything, so you don't usually get a lot of stuff going on, but occasionally, even in the basement, I can hear like the landscapers outside. Odds are, though, even if they were to come by right now, you wouldn't hear them because of the way this mic works. And to that point, if I lift the mic, you probably can't hear me very well right now, but as I bring the mic back down, because I was talking through that, you can hear me a lot better. That's how sensitive the mic is, right? So it's, or less, wrong way to put that. It's not the sensitivity as much as that it's directional for being able to listen to me. So that's really where the benefit comes in, and you sound a whole lot better when you have this kind of setup. So this headset in particular is a little bit more on the expensive side. I'm sharing it because it is what I'm using. There are models out there that are probably closer to the $30 range. Logitech has some in that range that would be fine. Again, it depends on how often and to what audience you're delivering to and to what kind of investment you're going to want to make there. But I definitely recommend something beyond the built-in mic. All right. Let me keep rolling through this. If you guys have questions, just toss them in. So I want to get back to answering the piece about how I look at my notes and how this all works. And so if you have one screen going and you're doing a presentation and you're sharing your screen, your one screen is now taken up. What do you do? Well, the answer is get another screen. Now that's easier said than done in some cases. So let's talk about that. I will tell you right now, I'm going to set up with 3 screens. I do this all day long. I've got a screen that I have in front of me where I have the chat, the participant list, all the stuff I need to interact with you guys, and also my presenter view of the slides. I have another screen where is what you guys are seeing, and then I have a third screen where I had for those of you who joined early, I was playing music. So I have a browser open playing some music. I have some other stuff going on too. So it gives me a lot of real estate. Now I realize not everybody has the room or the budget to have 3 screens running. So at a bare minimum, I'm going to recommend that you find a way to a second screen. And there's multiple ways to do that. You could get a monitor. They're pretty plentiful in this day and age. If you don't have a need for it that often, nice thing too is most computers nowadays have HDMI ports in them, and most of you have televisions. So you can use an HDMI cord from your TV to your computer, and suddenly your TV becomes a second monitor. If that's not an option, one other piece is you may have noticed during the presentation that you're seeing me live on camera. You also see my headshot as a participant in here. And that's because I'm logged in on my iPad. So what that means is with my iPad sitting here, I have the ability to see what my participants are seeing. I can also use that to bring up the the thumbnails of the individuals if I want to use that. So I can have a way to have another screen even if it's not directly connected. So that's a big part of it is I'm a big fan of the more screens, the merrier. I think my computer only supports 3, or I'd consider getting more than that. And this is one where bigger is better on the screen size too, again, assuming that you have the space for it. In my particular setup, I have 3 24-inch screens, and they're adjustable by height too, which lets me do some stuff. So again, think of it as like your home studio in a lot of ways. That's how I view mine. And you want to be set up for success on that. The next piece that we get into after that is the backgrounds. So first thing I'm going to ask you to do right now is look behind you. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare anybody, but go ahead and look behind you. It's not a trick. Nobody snuck into your house or anything, or if they did, it's not because of me. But turn around, and the question is, would you be embarrassed by anything that you see there? Because when you're on camera like this, people can see what's behind you. And so the other piece of that is, would they be distracted by anything there? I've done this a couple different ways. You'll notice that the wall behind me here is basically a blank wall, but I have a bookcase here. When I started off, I didn't have the bookcase at all, and I'm actually okay being on a blank wall. But the bookshelf, I have some things on there that are relevant to what I do during the day. I have a diploma up top there, as well as my Nittany Lion, so I wanted to make sure I was representing to a Penn State group here. And I see in the chat there that you have your awesome library. I have that too. I teach leadership classes for the most part. This is a shelf full of leadership books. The birds up on here are relevant to a program that I teach. And then I'm an Eagles fan, so I have that thrown in to go with as another bird there. And so that's where the background piece comes into play, but be conscious of what's in your background. Again, one, you don't want anything on camera you don't want on camera. And then also you don't want it to be a distraction. So what do? Some of us are in crowded spots. You don't have the luxury of finding a clean area that way or something that wouldn't be distracting. So Zoom and a lot of the other platforms have been kind enough to give us virtual backgrounds. The way they work has different degrees of success depending on back to the lighting that you have again, and also how cluttered that background is. So one of your options is going to be a green screen. And this is another thing that has become much more available in recent times. I do not have one of these, so I don't have a specific one to recommend, but you can go on Amazon or Google and find all kinds of different options. The reason the green screen's nice is it becomes a separator, and on top of that, the virtual backgrounds work best. They actually have an option in the settings to ask you if you have a green screen, and they'll be cleaner that way. If you do have a blank wall like this, they typically work pretty well. So here I am at Beaver Stadium back in happier times when it was full of people. And you'll notice it works pretty well. I don't even see the bookshelf anymore. There are some quirks though, right? Zoom has made out my head as including the headphones. So you get a couple of gaps around the side of my head where you can still see the wall peeking through. So it's not perfect, but it's not bad. But again, I'm right up against a pretty solid colored wall. If your background behind you is an open room, this may not work as well. So that's where the green screen comes in and can be a good recommendation for you. And again, with the virtual backgrounds, be careful too. And I realized my green screen disappeared off screen there, but let's bring it back. Be careful with the virtual backgrounds too, depending what you use, they can be distracting. I had a participant in a class the other day who somehow found a video loop and made it his background, but it was a video loop of a scene from The Office. And I actually asked him to change it during the class because it was distracting to me as the presenter and possibly to other people in the class because it kept moving. You've got the palm trees waving in the breeze, not as much, but this had a lot of action going on. So something to be conscious of anyway. And that takes us to the end of the toolbox. So I'll take a quick pause there before we get into this next piece. Anybody have a question on any of the toolbox items there? All right, and again, I'll give you time at the end as well. So let's move on to the next piece of this. So I've spent a good amount of time so far on the toolbox and your setup. And it's because, like I said, it's the most important part. You got to have the right setup. You want people to be able to communicate with you and to see you, basically, see and hear you. So then we get to the challenge that a lot of you mentioned is how do you engage with people? And so this is where you need to design your programs for engagement. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Again, I've been trying to model those as we've been going here. So let's look at this a little bit. First off is you want to be creative with your slides. There's an unwritten rule somewhere that you don't actually have to follow that says that every slide should be, and this is because the way PowerPoint, the basic PowerPoint slide is, that every slide should be a title and some bullets below it, and probably with a white background. We've probably all been victim of seeing that, and the worst ones are when the bullet points then have, full screen of text. So that's not how this has to work. And my suggestion is to be creative with your slides. Specifically, you can use a template. One nice thing is, I will tell you, I am not an artist. My creativity is more about putting things together than it is creating them from scratch. When I was doing this presentation, I started off saying this was a map to a virtual presenting. So I wanted to find a template that went along with that. And I was able to find a great pre-built template. There's a website called Slide Carnival that has hundreds of templates, if not thousands, that are all set up and ready to be downloaded for free in either PowerPoint or Google Slides. And so I found a great one that fit my needs, and then I was able to customize it from there. And I'm posting into the chat right now a link to a doc that I curate that has all kinds of resources, including Slide Carnival there to be able to find your templates. Then along with that, vary the format of the slides. So even though I'm using a template, the previous slide that I had up was a full screen picture with just a title on it. And that title was in the middle of the screen. I know it's shocking, right? To not have the title at the top of the screen, it can give people fits. But it looks different. You want it to be something interesting. And then even within these slides, I have multiple different configurations of where these are, where the text is, and different maps in the background, just to keep it a little bit interesting. I mentioned limiting text. I will tell you by the time this slide is loaded, it has more text than I'm necessarily comfortable with. But the other way to combat that, and you'll notice there's not a ton of text on this slide. The other way to combat that is the animations I'm using. So even though I'm going to have more text on the slide, I'm only revealing what I want the audience to focus on. So I didn't show the limit text piece until we get to the piece where I want to talk about it. All right. Use pictures. I mentioned that earlier on that. And what's nice about this is that the resource doc that I just shared has a whole bunch of sites on it with royalty-free pictures. Some of them have hundreds of thousands of pictures on it. You can go on Google Images and search for just about anything, but whether or not you have the rights to use those is a whole different story. And depending what venue you're presenting in, it may not matter. But being able to use royalty-free pictures saves you any copyright issues if your stuff is used publicly at any point in the future. So that is something that I highly recommend. And again, there's a whole bunch of them. The one that I use primarily is a site called Unsplash. That's on there. There's also ones that are specific for diversity that you can find pictures of people from all kinds of different racial backgrounds. There's one on there that's geared towards LGBT inclusive pictures. So there's a lot of different resources out there that you can use to make your slides interesting. And the other thing too is you want to advance your slides every few minutes, or at least make some changes on the screen. Partially with these reveals that I'm doing, it helps because, you know, there's at least a little bit of a change. But as a rule of thumb, you want to have the screen changing and the slides changing every couple of minutes. There's different numbers on it. 3 is a good rule of thumb. I targeted this at about an hour long, so I have about 20 slides. That's easy math there. That doesn't mean you have to stay on every slide for 3 minutes. You can stay on some for 30 seconds and some for 4 or 5 minutes. Just be aware that I suspect at least one of you is multitasking right now. So the more often that you change the slides, you force your participants to have to be continuing to look at the screen, which is another piece of that whole engagement piece. The other piece of what you can do with that too is making sure, and I've done this with you guys, is that when I'm asking questions, those questions are on the screen. That way, if somebody has lost focus for a minute, they can pick up what's going on by reading the question on the screen. And thanks, Ray. Yeah, that is a graphic design thing, right? It's also, nobody wants to just be reading. And the other challenge too, as a presenter where that's no fun with all the text, is if I put a lot of text up on the screen, you're going to read it. That's how people's minds work. Oh, there's cool stuff there. I need to see what it says. And they stop listening to the presenter and start reading what's on the screen. So you want to stay in charge. Another engagement thing is using some tools. So far as a group, we've used chat. You guys have entered stuff in there. I use the poll everywhere with you. We haven't done a whole lot of, or really not any yet, of doing call outs to you guys. So I could call on you and ask you to talk. I'm not going to do that right at the moment, but that's an option. Poll Everywhere is a great tool. And with both Poll Everywhere and Kahoot, and again, let's go back to the chat for a sec. How many of you have ever used Kahoot? Just give me a quick yes or no in the chat. And as you're doing that, with both Poll Everywhere and Kahoot, they are available as free options, but there are subscriptions to both of those that will give you either more features, more participant ability, or both, right? So again, you kind of get what you pay for. And yes, Kahoot is a Norwegian company. And so I have found that to be a great engagement tool. Let me wrap on Poll Everywhere and I'll come back to Kahoot though. So with Poll Everywhere, you saw an example of two different types of questions you can ask. I gave you the ones where you can put in comments and then upvote it, and also clicking on the emoji to indicate what your opinion was. They have a variety of other ones that include word clouds, multiple choice. So it's more of like a polling kind of thing. And there's ones that go beyond, oh, yeah, there's ones that go beyond that too. So the nice thing about Poll Everywhere, as I demoed earlier in the presentation, is that when you create a poll with them, you can embed it in your slides. I didn't have to go to another browser and open anything up. You guys did to participate. But as a presenter, I didn't have to change my screen, which makes it easy for me to use. And I use it frequently. It's also the nice thing too is things like Zoom that we're on tonight has polls in it. But the challenge with that is I'm the presenter and I'm speaking to you as an organization that has their own Zoom license. So the only way for me to set up polls in advance, if I was going to do that, would be to get with the host in advance, have them load polls, or try to do it as a presentation starting, and that gets messy. So this way I control it. I've got it built into my slides. I'm not dependent on another platform. It lets me test things a little bit better too. So let's get back to Kahoot, since a couple of you guys have used that one specifically as well. Kahoot's a cool tool. I've taught a lot of new hire classes and found it to be specifically good in situations where you are either training something technical or that has specific right answers. So it could be even if you're doing a presentation at the end of it to do a knowledge check is a good spot for it too. What's interesting about it is it was started primarily for use in schools, and it's fun. When I used to teach classes, when I in the previous role, we would use Kahoot as part of these new hire classes. Like I said, when we bring people back into future trainings, the first question we get is, are we going to play Kahoot? Because people like it. It's fun. So what it is that it's web-based on your end. So as a presenter, you would have to open a web browser and share it. And on the participants' end, they also participate either from a web browser or a phone app. And you put multiple choice questions up on the screen, which is indicated on the left side of that graphic there. So you look at a screen to see the questions and the potential answers, and then you answer from your device or from your computer. And there's music playing out of it. There's a countdown timer, and you compete. And the way you compete is you get points based on getting the correct answers and how quickly you get the correct answers. So just being fast doesn't get you points. You got to be fast and accurate. And people get really excited about it. It's a good energizer. So if you can make that fit right into your presentation, it can be a fun tool to play with. Again, from a presenter logistical standpoint, you can run into some problems. And the biggest problem is going to be, again, that you have to then potentially get out of your presentation, open a browser, have some stuff going on. So it's not without a pitfall, but it is an amazing platform. And in a lot of cases, it's well worth it. And it works well virtually too, because people can see the questions on your shared screen and participate from their own devices. So again, a couple of ways that you can engage people using some tools. And there's other ones out there. And as we're in this environment, more and more things keep coming up. So these are two of the more popular ones. They are not the only things out there, but they're good examples. And again, being that they're more popular, there's a lot of information out there about them and examples that you can borrow. So one other piece to keep things engaging is I really like using short videos as a way to, especially to explain things. I'll interject a video on a topic. It might even be something I could talk about, but if I've got an expert who's done a TED Talk and I can throw that in and play that for a couple of minutes, that is a great way to be a change of pace. It's another voice, gives me a minute to pause for a second, take a sip of something so that I can keep talking and move on from there. So I do have let me talk about some specific things with the video though. First up, if you're going to use a video, don't do a video just to do a video. It's got to be relevant. Also, download the video. Please, please, please download the video. There are some cases where you may have to stream it, which is why I say if possible. In a virtual environment, you run into many problems here. Problem number one is if you are streaming a YouTube video for purposes of then playing that on your screen to share with people, what's actually happening is that your computer has to be streaming that video, right? So the processor is now streaming video and is a download and an upload. Depending on your bandwidth, that could create problems. What's nice is Zoom does generally have a tool that allows you to optimize for video. I don't seem to have it with the settings I have tonight, so I'm hoping the video I'm going to show you here in a minute works okay with that. If you do have it available, please use it. It does make a difference. What it does on the presenter side is shuts down your feed of the thumbnails of the participants, but it definitely improves the quality of the video, and shorter is better. You know, I do not play a 15-minute video. You will lose people somewhere along the way there. I think optimal is probably in the couple of minute range. And back to the downloading piece along with that too. I just want to make sure I got all of that into there. While I also wanted to get you guys a link. So how do you download videos and why? So back to the whole idea of YouTube, right? It's not necessarily easy to get a YouTube video downloaded. They don't make it blatantly obvious. This is a technical group, so you guys may know how to do it. I'm actually throwing into chat an article from PC Mag that had a tip in there I've been using for months now, that because the article was published back in May. You can utilize the VLC player to basically get a download link for a YouTube video. And what's nice about that is once it's downloaded, it does a couple of things. I know that even if it gets removed from YouTube, it's mine. I've got it as a file. I know that when I go to play it, YouTube's not going to throw a random ad in at the beginning that might be something that's not appropriate for my audience. So those are a couple big ones. The other nice thing is that you can also embed it then into your presentation, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. And I see someone in the chat said that you can add something at the end of the YouTube link. What's interesting about those, and that might be one of the ones in the article too, and there used to be a website that I used all the time to convert these and download it. And I think those are occasionally or systematically shut down. I think Google goes after them. And so I'm not even sure why the version I'm using works, but it's basically that VLC provides a link that is how it's streaming it, and somehow that gives you a download button. I don't know the ins and outs of it. Google could change their dynamics tomorrow, and what I'm telling you might not work. It looks like the article that I posted has been updated over time, and it's a little bit of a game of whack-a-mole. When one avenue gets shut down, other ones seem to pop up. If it's not a YouTube video, like this doesn't necessarily apply to Vimeo or other things, which is why I'm saying ideally find videos you can download. It will be better, but it's not a necessity. All right. So with that, I do want to play a video. This one is really short, and it's an intro to my next topic, which is why I have it in here. You should be able to hear it okay, and it may stutter a little bit, but that's not really the point anyway. So I will tell you, if you're a fan of I'm going to say 80s movies. I think it's right. It's either 80s or early 90s. You will appreciate this, and if not, you might anyway. So here we go.
Extreme close-up! Wah! 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 Okay, all right.
Excellent.
So the videos can be comic relief as well, which is also nice. So those were our friends Wayne and Garth from Wayne's World. And the reason I play them there is because my next question is, are you ready for your close-up? Which is the next section here. So you've been listening to me talk now for about 45 minutes. And if you're watching my image on the screen along with the slides, you've been looking at me for 45 minutes. And when I say looking at me, I'm in a box and it's mostly my head. So this is my close-up the whole time. So one of the things that I've gotten, again, out of doing virtual training, and one of the better tips that I got early on, and I know I've mentioned the certification a couple of times, and it was really impactful. It was, I'll give credit here. The instructor's a woman named Cynthia Clay, and one of the things that she brought to the instruction was the fact that she had a background in theater. And I will tell you, from someone who trains classes, I do my best attempt when I'm in person doing classes to bring as much energy as I can to it. And as I'm bringing that energy, right, I've got to keep everybody engaged, but I also have, you can see all of me instead of just my head. So I can do things like point. I move my hands while I'm talking. You may notice my shoulders moving a little bit, but you can't see my hands, right? So all my energy has to be in what you see on the screen. So presenting virtually requires an even bigger performance, for lack of a better word, than being in an in-person presentation. And that theater background comes into play. If you've ever been to any kind of live theater, you watch the actors, they're in a hall where they have to project to the back of a theater where there's hundreds of people potentially, and they give a big performance and they emote. If you need a good example of this and you happen to have Disney Plus, you can watch Hamilton and you can see it. Even though they're doing close-ups on camera, you can see what they're doing. It's big. And part of that's that engagement piece. Also varying your voice and tone. So a lot of that piece comes into the energy you bring in. And I have some of that naturally. I will tell you that there are days after training for a full day that I am exhausted. I've had week-long classes where on the Saturday I pass out for a good chunk of the day because it does use a lot of energy, and caffeine is your friend. I have a small collection of Monster nearby if I need it, and I use it occasionally. But that's one of those things where you want to bring your best performance here to keep people interested and engaged. All right. And with all of that, we get to one last piece that I've got, which is adapting to the unexpected. Be prepared for what can go wrong. And I've had all kinds of interesting things happen. Some of these may have happened to you guys, right, as well. So things like, I was in the middle of teaching a class last week and the power in my house went out for 5 seconds. It was literally 5 seconds, but that was enough to restart the modem. So all of a sudden I went offline. I had, fortunately, and the way we do our classes this way is that I have a coworker who's in on the class who was able to let them know what was going on because I sent her a quick text to tell her. And fortunately, I was able to get back in a couple of minutes and keep the class going. If it had gone out longer, she had the slides ready and could have continued it. So if you're in a situation where you're training like that, it's one thing. If you're giving a presentation to somebody, then you may need to be prepared to pause it. The presentation may need to pause and then come back. The nice thing about these kind of issues popping up is that because of the circumstance we all find ourselves in, almost everybody I've come across is really understanding when those things happen. We expect it. There's all the other weird little things that happen too, like if you have pets and nowhere to corral them, and we've probably seen this again on the news and other things where all of a sudden there's a dog in the background or coming and barking and taking over the sound. Things like that can happen. I was teaching a class this morning and I was in the middle of playing one of those videos and PowerPoint decided to quit on me and I had to go back in and open it up and get back to my right slide and start the video again. Again, if you handle it with confidence, let people know that you're having a technical issue, and there seems to be a lot of patience for that right now. So being Zoom bombed, I haven't seen that as much lately. Somebody just put that into the chat. Zoom fortunately added some things like this meeting had a waiting room to be able to get in so you can kind of check it. The nice thing too is being prepared on the buttons that if you got somebody who accidentally unmutes or intentionally unmutes, like I said, I call on people for questions. I'll give you guys an opportunity here in a minute to ask questions. When somebody unmutes to ask a question, but then forgets to mute themselves again and starts a conversation in the background, make sure that you as the host know how to mute your participants. Or if you're not the host in the presentation, make sure whoever the host is prepared to do so. Those are the kind, and even if somebody does Zoom bomb you, um, uh, no apologies necessary on that. I'm looking at the chat again. It makes for a good example. And again, people are forgiving. But if somebody does Zoom bomb and you see somebody poking around who shouldn't be there, it's a matter, at least in Zoom, of right-clicking on them and throwing them out of the meeting. So again, being ready to be able to do those kinds of things. And there's probably others out there that you guys may have. But again, the only thing you can expect is that something at some point is going to go wrong. I had one tonight, actually. And I don't know why, because I do presentations like this all the time. I know this presentation pretty well, so it didn't really make too much of an impact, but the presenter mode that I have in the screen in front of me, where I do have my preview of the slides that are coming up and my notes, disappeared. I kept trying to click it back and it wouldn't come back, and the chat disappeared for a minute, so I just left it minimized and I rolled on. And so if you're going to be giving an important presentation and you're not necessarily as familiar, or you have a lot of notes, that's where you may want to have a backup, like either have it on, you could have it on, if you don't have a printer, you could have it on your phone. If you do have a printer, you could print them out, and just be prepared for what might go wrong. That's the best advice that I can give. So with that, the last piece I'll leave you with is this. And I wish I could claim this as an original quote, or I could attribute it to Abe Lincoln. Although interestingly, when I looked it up, it might have been Ben Franklin, but I've seen it in a variety of different forms, and it's just, we'll call it sage advice, which is, if you fail to plan, you can plan to fail. So get your toolkit together, prepare, come up with some ideas for your presentation where you can be engaging, and prepare for those unexpected things that are going to happen along the way. And if you plan for things, then even if they do go a little off the track, you can still get to where you're going. So with that, I will take any questions that you guys have, and I will give you the option to either put it in chat, come off mute and ask. I guess those are really the two options I've got. So the floor is yours. Or if not, we can wrap it up.
Does anybody have any questions?
There we go. I think we got one here. Do you think answering questions on the fly is usually the way to go, or should you save those to the end? I feel like answering questions on the fly can mess up your flow. Good question. Again, I would say it's dependent on your comfort level as a presenter. It can mess up your timing for sure. However, it depends how you're building it. I would say if they're holding them to the end, it is a safer road potentially. I liked being able to offer the input as we go as a way to have some more engagement. I've been doing this for a while and I'm comfortable with it, but I can see where that would be a concern from people. How do you deal best with not knowing the answers to questions, which goes along well with that? You need to say, I don't know. This is like trainer 101 kind of thing that I'll share with you, which is, if you've ever taken a training class, almost every trainer, at least in a physical classroom, will put up a sheet somewhere that says parking lot on it or something similar, where when somebody asks a question, and then you don't know the answer, the best response possible really is, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but let me find out and I'll get back to you. And then being able to use your resources to do it. You lose all credibility if you try to answer something you don't know with an incorrect answer, because there's a chance that somebody in the room knows the right answer and it doesn't go well. And again, I think people are generally appreciative of the frankness and honesty behind that. It's hard to know everything about everything, especially in a Google age where if you don't know the answer, you just Google it. You don't have to remember stuff. You just need to know how to find things. So that's part of it. But again, some of these things depend on your level of comfort with presenting the topic and your knowledge base, right? I'm pretty confident in coming into a presentation like this that if somebody's going to attend this, it's most likely because they have some stuff to learn and they're not an expert on it. So I'm most likely the person who knows the most on this topic who's going to be here. And even if there is somebody who knows more than me, I'll just, something else I've tended to do is use that person as a resource. And the nice thing about working with adults, and what's different about teaching adults versus teaching children, is that adults like to share their experiences. And so if you've got some knowledge, hell, right now I'll tell you, if anybody has information that that I've missed that you happen to know, I think it's great. I like to learn too. Let's see. So we do have some other questions in here. Do you have any recommendations for dealing with an audience whose primary language isn't English? Subtitles or other tools to be better understood? Yeah, so I don't use this a whole lot. I have a friend who is very focused on this and provided a lot of resources. There's a couple different ways to do it. PowerPoint actually has a feature built into the presentation that it can live transcribe. So does Google Slides. I think from what I've seen anecdotally, at least, that the Google Slides works a little bit better, in part because it is a Google product. They have pretty good translation tools, and so it's integrated into that. Zoom at least was working on a feature for that I don't think is out yet. There is a option to activate closed captioning within Zoom. It requires somebody typing in the captions, though, as you go. So there are ways to do it. There's information out there. This is another one of those, I personally haven't used it. So I know enough to be dangerous on this topic, but I would not claim to be an expert on this. If anybody needs more details on that, I can connect you with the I'll say expert on the topic. And let's see, how do you handle people who are aggressive or want to help you during your presentation? You know what, that can go a couple of ways. Again, I teach a large range of classes. Right now, most of the classes I teach are about an hour and a half long, and I have groups that go through a series of 5 of them. And inevitably, I have 1 or 2 people in each of these classes who, when I ask for volunteers, are the ones who volunteer almost every time. So this also gets into a larger piece of this. This is some of the skills that I picked up as a trainer that it's less specific to the virtual world, but it applies here. And so sometimes those people are helpful. And what you can do is you want to at least acknowledge it. If you're asking questions and you're always getting answers from the same person, one of the things that you can do is, thank them for their input and ask, say, we want to be able to hear from some other people. You want to do it nicely, right? It's like, thank you, appreciate that. Well, let's hear from some other people in the group here, right? And ask it in that kind of way. Let's see, handle people who are aggressive. I mean, right, to some degree, you want to have some level of respect going on. I've been fortunate that I haven't had too many issues on these front, but there's always the disruptive person. It sounds like from looking at what you guys are going back and forth with in chat that there may be some more specific examples. If you have something you want, and feel free again to come off mute if you can give me some depth into if you've had something, we can hide the names to protect the not so innocent, but some context would help.
I think women in tech, especially when they're doing a presentation, at least me, I'm always nervous about the tech bro in the audience who's going to try and teach you what you're presenting. And I guess I'm looking for like a way that you can address that in a tactful manner.
So I'll give you my best guess on this, and this is another one where I don't want to claim to have all the answers on it. But when you get that person who's the expert, part of what I think part of that is redirecting it, right? So it's like one possibility would be to address the person and say, it sounds like you have a lot of insight on this. I think it would be great if we could talk after the presentation and I can learn a little bit more about what you're talking about. I don't know if that would shut down the people that you're talking about, right? I mean, it depends to what level it gets to. You can, and it's again comfort level. You can take the stage and say, thank you for that. And it's one of those things. If you end it as a thank you, like thanks for the input. You can also deflect to later. And I did this a little bit in the presentation too, right? I think, Ray, it was you. He asked me a question earlier and I said, we're going to get to that. Where that might be a piece too is like, what? That's a good point. I think it fits better later, or we can address it in the Q&A I have at the end here, right? Because sooner or later, in that way, you're deflecting it, and at least maybe then you may run out the clock in that case too. But that's an interesting topic that is probably worth exploring in depth. I'm not sure if that helped give you an answer or not, but maybe it's at least an alternative.
No, it helps. Thanks.
Sure. Good questions from you guys. Any others?
Seems like we're good. Anybody else? Last
Yeah.
call.
Well, I'll just wrap this with then. Thank you guys for having me. I enjoyed getting the chance to do this. I encourage you all to take the opportunities to present where you can. It's like anything else. The more you practice, the better you get at it. And even though I'm hoping that sooner than later we can all start to gather again, I think the reality is that this kind of virtual communication isn't going away. We've been on a path towards it all along, and the pandemic has sped it up a little bit. So this is going to be a valuable skill for the foreseeable future. And on that note, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to connect. Best way is probably either on LinkedIn or Twitter. If you search my name on LinkedIn, I can guarantee you I am the only Josh Maleeff on LinkedIn. And if you find another one, I want to know who it is, because I think they're just stealing my identity. And on Twitter, I am Joshing, Joshing. So feel free to connect with me on either of those spots, and I'm happy to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Josh. I really appreciate this presentation. It is a valuable thing. I know I just did a similar presentation at work, and I think it's really valuable for everybody with going virtual, just like you said. So with that, I will close it out, and I hope everybody has a good night.
Night.